All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, I know. It's lunch. Thank you for that. Let's try that one more time. Okay. I know. I hate those presenters that do this, so I'm going to do it anyway. Good morning, or good, no, see, I did this. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellent. See, I need to wake up because I told you good morning. I was even talking back here and I'm like, don't say good morning. Don't say good morning. And what do I say? Good morning. Well, very happy to have all of you here today. My name is Ashley Brickley and I am the director of the Disability Center at the University of Missouri. I see some of my Mizzou peeps out here, so glad to have you in the room. I am joined today by some of my favorite colleagues, Melissa Hill with Columbia College and Karen Thompson-Wolf with Westminster College. We were invited to come and share with you information in regards to that transition of students going from high school to college and really share information about our resources, what we're doing here. So we're all very excited to be here. And one of the things that really makes me excited is that we have been working together for several years now. I think it started with getting lunches together with all of our mid-Missouri colleges to really talk about what were we doing, how were we supporting students, sharing ideas. And so this was just a great way to bring some of us back together to have an opportunity to share information with all of you. And so we hope that you will find this to be very helpful. As we go along today, click forward. There we go. I want to give a little bit of an overview of what to expect. We have broken our presentation up into three parts. There's three presenters, so three of us. So the first part we're going to do is cover the differences between ADA and 504 and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We are also going to provide some information on things to consider when preparing for college. So things that we think that students really should start thinking about now while they're in high school that we think would be helpful for you to share and pass along from there. From there, we're going to talk about how to connect with disability resources. All of us are different, but we have some common themes. So we're going to go through that information because that's going to be really integral for students as they are looking for accommodations in college. And then we're going to wrap up with some of those campus resources. What is there beyond those accommodations that students may be needing to look at as they're exploring colleges or as they're in their first couple of years at the institution? We will wrap up with a Q&A. So because we have such a large group and information that we're going to go through, we're going to have you hold on to your questions until the very end. I know, that's mean of me. So please, as we're talking, jot those questions down, and then we will make sure to leave time at the end for you to ask those questions and for us to elaborate further. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone off to Melissa to get us started.
Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it. As she mentioned, I'm Melissa Hill. I'm the Director of Student Accessibility Resources at Columbia College. Pleased to be with you today. And I'm going to start the presentation just kind of sending a foundation message to you that this is our title reference, Bridging the Gap. And one of the things that's really important to kind of pick up and take home with you today as we present is that it's more than just the senior year, more than just telling them things at the last minute. These are things that they should be thinking about and skills they should be honing and things that they're preparing for through the whole duration of their high school experiences as well. So you'll kind of see some differences as we go through the presentation today as to the nature of some of those things that are going to be different for students. We often all get feedback from students who reach our offices as, wow, A, I didn't know you existed. B, I didn't know that my role in this is completely different. And C, that even how you help me in the processes for that are so much different. So we're going to cruise through some highlights for you today to kind of give you some ideas that you need to be kind of planting seeds, if you will, in the knowledge of the students that you're working with as you move forward in your support with them. So I have two columns here. We have the IDEA and then ADA differences. And really, one of the biggest pieces of kind of foundationally is IDEA is intended for success. You guys are doing whatever it takes to make sure students are successful and they graduate. Our premise is a little different. Ours is about access. And so we don't necessarily change what is required, but maybe the delivery of things specifically. So we're going to touch on a few specific points in that regard. So, the rights that are provided here, free and appropriate education versus prohibiting discrimination. Who is served? Everybody. On the ADA side is folks that qualify. Disability definition, IDEA speaks specifically to 15 specific disabilities. ADA doesn't have a specific list. It's really more, do you have one life event or skill that is impacted by a particular type of condition? How do we identify? Big piece here. For you guys, it's the school that identifies students with disabilities. In ADA, in higher education, the student's the one that has to identify themselves as a student with a disability seeking accommodation. So they need to come forward. We don't seek them out. And let's see here, determining services. So K through 12, you're creating an IEP. You have curriculum, special goals, processes, measuring progress, things of that nature that you're shooting for. For us, we are specifically looking at documentation and what is it that the student is indicating are their experiences and the concerns that they have. Kind of going back to bridging the gap, how do we make sure you have access to all of your educational materials and opportunities? And that's determined really between the student and the specific staff member from the Disability Resource Office. That's what it means there by DRO. It's like a collaborative conversation that takes place kind of with documentation, the information from the student, and the expertise of the ADA coordinator or whatever specific title that college has given to that staff member. And then accommodation plans. So there's specifically a plan, as I'd mentioned, kind of gauging the progress of things. And for us, it's just a letter that goes to the instructor. We don't tell the instructor anything specific as to the disability, the nature of things personally to that particular student. It's, hey, Johnny's in this class. These are the things we're asking you to do differently. Where with the accommodation plans, often anyone who's supporting a student has very specific information as to what's going on with that student. Specific conditions, impact, recommendations, all of those kinds of things. And in the higher education component, it's very different. Disclosure. So everybody's going to know with IDEA that's working with the students all the specific details as I'd mentioned. And for higher education, we don't provide any specific information other than what we're wanting the instructor to do differently. Curriculum requires, or communication, requires that they meet annually, go over the progress, the goals. For us, it's really that kind of once and done, and then whenever a student needs to have conversation about maybe a particular class, maybe there's a new condition, maybe something in their condition's changed. But again, that is something that the student is seeking out with our office. So there isn't any ongoing requirement beyond the initial approval process for ADA. For support, teachers and parents help the student make decisions and help ask for support. In ADA, the student must ask for the support and actually obtain that from the Disability Support Office at that particular institution. The role of the parents. The parents are very, very included in the decision making and the facilitation, the advocacy piece on behalf of the student. And for ADA, the college student, anyone over the age of 18 is considered an adult. So the parent's nothing more than a consultation. And in fact, without a release of information, folks from offices such as ours aren't even speaking to the parents about anything in particular. Kind of not even acknowledging that the student's with us unless there's been a release signed. And then even then, it's more in consultation. The direct relationship is between the access office and the student. Personal devices are provided by the district if determined necessary in the IEP versus ADA. Colleges are not required to provide any personal devices or services. Ours are very specific to academic access only. assignments. Some very specific things that often our new students are shocked to learn is that teachers will take time to remind you of your assignments, your due dates, kind of keep track of you, make sure you're staying on task and that you're meeting the expectations. Not the case in higher education. We're expecting that the students are looking at the syllabus, they're looking at their schedules, they're talking to the instructors, they're keeping track of all of that on their own. And lastly, the expectations. So as I mentioned earlier, we're not changing the requirements. So if this is a requirement for the specific class or for a particular degree, you have to do all the same assignments, you have to do the same exams, you have to do the same everything that's required. It's just that we're maybe changing the format or the delivery mode, things of that nature. So if everybody else has to do it, you have to do it. And that often is very surprising to new students, and they're thinking that there's going to be a significant amount of modifications to their college experience, which isn't the case. Okay, so the other thing we want to talk to you about today is some things that you want your students to be thinking about when they pick schools. So as we progress with our presentation today, one of the things you're going to find is we're all going to talk about the differences between our schools. There's a reason why the three of us are here, beyond the fact that we collaborate and connect often with each other, but we're a good variation of different types of institution that a student can pick from that has a different level of accommodations and support programs in place. So we'll give you a little taste of what the differences are and things of that nature that students should be considering when they're looking at picking institution specific as a student with a disability. So as we start here, learn whether the school is inclusive, accessible, and accepting of people with disabilities. As you find anywhere that you go, there's different climates as to what that looks like in different environments that you're accessing day to day throughout your life. And the same is true for higher education institutions as well. Specifically, the student needs to know how the disability shapes their experiences and consider that going into things such as housing, navigating the campus, looking at parking, different things that they need to be exploring. And when I kind of emphasize, how does your experience shape you, that's really important for a student to be able to articulate, because what we find is that, high school students struggle with articulating that very well because somebody's been saying that on their behalf. The parents are kind of the mouthpiece, if you will, the representative of the student. And so then when they're looked at to come and tell me, how does this impact you, so that we can figure out the accommodations, sometimes they really struggle with figuring out, what does that look like and how do I actually explain to you what my experiences are. So that piece is really important. The size of the school disability service office might even provide some insight as to the level of ability and types of programs and experiences that they offer. As you imagine, the bigger they are, the more they can do, probably. Consider how many students with disabilities attend that college. What kind of documentation are you going to ask from me? As you'll find out from the three of us, it's very different. And so knowing that if this is a school I want to go to, know what their expectations are and be prepared for that prior to arrival. Find out what type of support and accommodations are most often provided by that college. Visit the school's website or social media accounts. Search for Disability Resource Center, clubs, networks, different aspects available to students with disability and neurodivergent students. So is there clubs and organizations? Is there advocacy groups? Are there things that are actively happening on that campus? Or is it a campus that's specifically, what I'm going to find from that is whatever the Disability Resource Office is offering is accommodations. Are there scholarships available to the students with disabilities? Is there community for students there on the campus? Some of the campuses have diversity, equity, inclusion centers, and disability is part of that fabric, so that might be of interest to a student as well. And does the college or university have programs that meet your very specific needs? Again, kind of going back to really understanding your experience and being able to articulate that to folks from our offices. All right, so that's it for my section. I'm going to pass it on.
You got that? Hi, I'm Karen Thompson-Wolf. I'm the director of the Tomnitz Family Learning Opportunity Center. And my piece today is to talk about connecting to the support at the college and talk a little bit about how colleges are different in their support. And we will address the spectrum of support in a minute. So, first of all, when you go to college, as Melissa mentioned, identifying your needs. Having students be very articulate in the needs they need, identifying it very specific, and making that list. Because as they make that list, that's going to drive them to ask questions in college visits so that they can determine what type of college support they do need to be successful. Because as Melissa indicated, ADA is about access, but the support pieces are what drive the success. And students that need more support are going to need to find those kind of programs. So we have three broad areas of support that most colleges fall into one of these categories. You have the bare bones basic of an institution that's ADA compliant. What that means is that their Office of Disability Resources or Disability Support ensures that students have access through the law by ADA. These are often, most common things are alternative exam settings, sometimes note-taking systems, access to courses. I mean, they ensure access, but it's a very bare bones, basic, making sure that the institution falls within the parameters of the law. You can step up a little bit from that and go to an institution that has a center approach. A center approach offers more than ADA, but I don't know how to explain it. I'm going to let Ashley talk about the center approach a little bit here in a second because their MU is a very center approach. But typically centers are staffed by workers, whether they're professionals or graduate students or students, that support the students in a known location and provide the support based upon what's requested by the students in that center. Then you can go to the far extreme, which are programs that are comprehensive in nature. These types of programs attempt to provide students with a model of support that mimics what they're used to. Westminster College happens to have a comprehensive program, and we use kind of the resource teacher from high school as our model, where students have a go-to person. So you can get a broad spectrum of support, and it's very imperative for students to identify what they need to ensure that they are seeking college support and resources that meet those needs. We have a lot of students at our institution that use just our ADA compliance, but we do have a few students that need very in-depth, one-on-one individualized support to be successful. So that comprehensive program often drives beyond the access and tries to mimic the success piece within the bounds of being fair and equitable. But there are different types of support, and it's very important as students are bridging that gap to college to identify, write it down, seek out the college that provides the type of support that will give them the chance to be successful. What's the next slide? So when we were talking about documentation, one strategy that I often recommend when I get to talk with students that are still in their junior, sophomore year in high school is I encourage them to create a file that contains kind of all the types of potential documentation that they would need when they approach the disabilities office. That can include, but not limited to, the most recent educational, the gold standard. Having an adult-based educational evaluation within the last 5 years that list the diagnoses and a series of recommendations or accommodations. I also encourage students to include in that their latest and most up-to-date 504 or IEP to use as kind of a reference point and a discussion point with the Disabilities Support Office. Any accommodations that they received in high school through secondary support, like class within a class, sometimes isn't always documented, but it should be, because that is support. So any type of non-IEP or 504 documentation, and any contact information for any of the external support services like their case managers, state services, even the high school resource teacher that could serve as a reference point in case the student wants to get it, connect them with the disabilities office with permission. By creating this file, what we do is we arm the student with the information they need to have the conversation when they get to college. Because those conversations can't happen without the documentation. And the more thorough the documentation, the more the disability support services can support the student and find the right accommodations that give them the full access to the curriculum. I know at our institution, the gold standard is an evaluation, a psychoeducational evaluation. We have provided accommodations based on prior accommodation documentation without an updated testing. We do not like to do that, but we would rather err on access for the student than to deny access. But we do encourage students to follow that up with gaining current documentation because we can't continue that indefinitely. You guys have anything to add to that piece?
Yeah, I was going to, Karen, since you mentioned kind of our office, I think I was going to start talking a little bit about our process and kind of talk a little bit how that differs and elaborate on your center approach that I think you called me out on as well. And so I'm going to move up here. Ashley Brickley, Mizzou. So as Karen mentioned, our office kind of falls under that center approach. And so, which is something I actually I don't think, Karen, you were the one who defined that for me, because I had not heard of that, but I'm like, ooh, we're the center approach. So with our office, yes, we are primarily to help with the establishment of accommodations. We meet with students through that accommodation process, establish their eligibility, work with the faculty to make sure that they have that. But kind of beyond the accommodation piece, there are things that we are doing in our office to really foster more of a sense of belonging, more identity development that is happening in our office. And so we are very fortunate that our office has the support to not only do kind of the basic ADA compliance of creating accommodation plans, but also to look at developing programming. So September is Disability Culture Month for Mizzou. And so we, along with our colleagues in inclusion, diversity, and equity and in other areas on campus, develop programming specific to raising awareness of disability history, disability culture, awareness. We have worked on creating mentoring programs. And so right now we have a faculty mentoring program. We are hopefully here in the next couple of years we'll be starting a peer mentoring program. We're in the early stages of looking at how can we really respond to students who are requesting an opportunity to connect with community, and so we're looking at what that might be. We are also looking at and actually have created a disability graduation ceremony where we give any disabled student who is interested a cord that they can wear at graduation to really recognize their accomplishments and what they've achieved while being a student at Mizzou. And so we kind of have that in-between approach where we don't have necessarily a comprehensive program that Karen was talking about that is available through her university, but we kind of have that in-between approach that we're trying to establish as well. Do you want me to go through how we establish accommodations at Mizzou too? Sure. All right, we're double checking our notes as to if we're moving to the next part. So I'll also jump right in to talk a little bit more about kind of this process that we've mentioned as well. So at Mizzou, we are a little bit different, and I'll let Melissa talk about how that process goes at your institution as well, but very much that same. All of us have that responsibility that students need to self-identify with us. They need to seek us out. Even if they've had an IEP or a 504 plan, we do not know. Even if they mention or something to admissions, we do not know that they have a disability, so they need to reach out. At Mizzou, we have an online application that we want students to fill out after they have been admitted to Mizzou or as soon as they think that they are going to need to request accommodations. That online application gives us some basic information, and then they're going to connect with an access advisor to have an access planning meeting. And that's when they're actually going to meet and discuss what their disability is, their experience with accommodations, and establish that accommodation plan. Here's a little bit of a difference here. So I'm going to kind of contradict Karen a little bit because we actually focus on student self-report as our first part of documentation. Not all institutions are that way, and I still agree that the gold standard for any student who's going to any institutions should be that psychoeducational evaluation. But this is one of those differences that students need to know. Again, what is the documentation requirement for the institution that I'm going? Because we're all different. Some are going to hold firm that is what they're going to need. Others are going to say, it's a little bit more flexible in regards to what we're going to request. And so making sure students know what that documentation requirement is going to be very important. Now, we say that we focus on student self-report first and foremost, but we might request documentation. When do we request documentation? When the student isn't able to articulate their needs. And so going back to what was discussed earlier is, can the student understand what their disability is? Can they talk about it? Do they know? I have unfortunately been in sessions where I ask a student what their disability is, and it's deer in headlights because they haven't been told. And so one of the ways to really help students is to make sure that they know what their disability is. They know what those functional limitations are. They know what their accommodations are. So that way when they get to meeting with me or any of us, they can clearly articulate not just that I had extended time on exams, but because of my distractibility and my slow processing speed and the fact that I need to read things 3 times in order to comprehend it, that's why I need the extended time. That's really going to help them when they come to the disability office, so that way we can understand really why are they requesting it. Again, the documentation can be really helpful because we've had that where students have come in, they're like, I don't really know. And so we're going back to that documentation to say, okay, this is what your documentation is telling us and what we're going to do. So a little bit of a difference here that we do at Mizzou, but again, very similar in that the student is driving that, they're filling out, they're identifying, they're talking with us, and then we're establishing those accommodations, and they're going to work with our faculty to get those accommodations. Melissa?
So Columbia College is an example of the first box, the ADA compliance. That's where we're at. And there's a little bit of a difference in how our institution is designed. We have over 30 nationwide locations throughout the United States. We have a huge online presence as well. And then we have a smaller traditional student day program experience here in Columbia. And so with that, our ADA office is already strapped, just trying to make sure everything is good everywhere, all over the place. And so that's where kind of we start with what do we do to make sure that people can have access to their courses in all of the locations and the facilities that we have. To then Mizzou is doing extra programming within the college or throughout the university and campuses, trying to increase the culture, the experiences, to then Karen's having even additional support programs designed for specific students with particular disabilities, right? So we're kind of an example of that continuum. For us, we require the documentation no matter what. And that's because our people are all over the place. Most of the people that we serve are somewhere else. I don't even get to see them visually. I don't get to interact with their instructors to kind of find out what's happening in the classroom. Can you articulate, what this you're maybe seeing in the papers that somebody's submitting, or the exams that you're doing, all of those kinds of things. And so we're very much on the fringe of those experiences, and even getting to know on a more intimate basis those students. So we ask for the documentation. We're minimum necessary. The 3 things we want on there is a diagnosis, your name, and the credentials and name of the provider. Certainly we would love the gold standard. We shoot for that, but the rest of it will get you in the door and get you what you need. It just we try to explain to the students, the more information that we know about you and your experience, the better off we are in terms of determining the accommodations for you. So, and a lot of times, as we've all experienced, students get in there and they don't even know what to ask for because A, they've never done college before, B, they're just learning what it's like to be an adult, what, the information that folks have been telling me about my disability and kind of speaking on my behalf, that kind of thing. And so then as they get in there and have some experiences and want to have conversation about tweaking those pieces and can articulate things differently and better, than we certainly can advance those accommodations based on their experiences and learning more about their needs on our particular campuses. So anything you guys want to?
Yeah, like Ashley, our institution uses self-disclosure through an online format. Actually, we have a QR code that runs through our TV codes that actually says, do you need an accommodation or did you have a 504? We give them a scan code that takes them to a page that describes the process. We also include that in the registration and the new student packets, just to connect them to the how-to process so that they can do that on their own time with their own comfort, that they're not identified or singled out. But everything we do is an online process that begins with self-identification, that outlines that they need to bring documents with them to set up an intake meeting and discussion to determine an accommodation plan, and then we outline an accommodation plan for basic accommodations and then course type specific accommodations. I've been at my institution for 26 years, so I know what goes on in a lot of the classes, so that as I intake with the student, I can actually discuss certain scenarios that I know that will exist at the institution so that I can address that in the intake process. But we do everything, usually it's a 30, 40-minute meeting sometimes, as we walk through their documentation and we talk about their needs, and then we talk about how to get those needs. It's always pushing the students that it's student-initiated requests, that if they need a letter, we'll create a letter, but they must approach the faculty. We do not approach the faculty on their behalf. So teaching students to articulate their needs and practice requesting accommodations is a very beneficial bridging tool that would aid students as they make that transition. College is already hard enough. Train them with what we can so that it's easier when they do step into the college arena to ask for what they need to be accessible.
I'm going to totally echo that. Practice now. If the student isn't in that IEP or that 504 meeting, get them in the meeting, get them listening. And in their senior year, if you can get them to actually lead the meeting, or even practice going to an instructor and practice talking about my accommodation, my plan, that's really going to help them when they get to college and all of a sudden, you're an adult and you're expected to do this. I laugh because it's like bridging the gap, and it really is. Like in high school, we're going to take care of you, all of the support, and then all of a sudden in college, it's like you're on your own. And so as much as we can provide that support for students in high school, it's really going to help them in this next step. All right, can I I'm going to take this. Haha, the power is mine again. So as you're probably sensing, there are some common threads, and we're going to keep on saying now is the time to start getting students prepared, and now is the time for students to really start reflecting on what do they need in their accommodations, in their college experience, so that way they are choosing the right institution. I love to meet with prospective students, and I think we talked about this earlier, is making sure that students, when they're doing their college visits, they're meeting with their disability resources offices to talk about what are my needs, what am I needing, what can you offer. Know that they're not going to talk about what accommodations they're going to receive, but it's a great opportunity to say, is this institution right for me? And as Melissa had said earlier, what are the other resources that I'm going to need? And so this is a great time to start jotting down, what are all of those supports that I'm getting? What fall under maybe accommodations? What falls beyond accommodations that I'm going to need supports? So that way they can either start developing those skills, or they can make sure that the resources that they need are going to be at that institution. So just as a recap, we saw this image just a couple of slides ago, right? So the disability resources offices, there's kind of a spectrum. There's a variety of different ways that they support students, from just providing accommodations to that comprehensive academic support, academic coaching program. Every institution is different. Sometimes those additional supports come with an additional charge. And so making sure that the students are asking those questions so that way they are prepared is going to be really important. But one of the great things that I actually love about my job is I collaborate. I collaborate a lot, and I partner with a variety of different places on our campus. And yes, sometimes that's building bridges with other colleagues in mid-Missouri across the nation to understand how we're doing that. But a lot of times it's also what is available on our campus. And so up here on this slide, I have I tried to chunk this into 3 different areas, but I thought of even more. And so there are a plethora of resources that can be on a campus. They're going to vary depending on the campus your student is going to. And so this is where it's really important for students to kind of think of yes, I need tutoring. Yes, I'm going to need to have a counseling center. I'm going to need to make sure that I have, I really want to build community. I want support. So they can start thinking about what are those resources so they can really build that information. And this is, again, who we refer to a lot. So in the academic area, we've talked about how our offices are primarily for access. One of the common questions I receive from students is, do you provide tutoring? Do you provide academic support coaching? And remember, we're in that center approach, and so we do not. We are referring a lot to our colleagues in the academic support center, in the learning center, that do provide tutoring, that do provide writing assistance, that provide some academic coaching, some study plan consulting. And so that's a great resource that we are able to refer students to on our campus at Mizzou. That does not come with a charge, but again, we're reaching out and we're sending students. I'm doing this because it literally is just across the way on Lowry Mall that we send students to do that. For those of you who don't know, at Mizzou, it is this brick path that's literally right across from our office. So we refer a lot to the Academic Support Center. Some institutions also have a TRIO program. TRIO is a federal grant program that has this mission to support students. Disabled students are one of the classifications of students that may be eligible. We refer to our TRIO program a lot because it provides an additional level of academic advising, an additional level of academic support that our office isn't able to provide. And so if a student knows that they need some resources, it might be saying, I might not get that at the Disability Center, but where are the other academic learning resources, the TRIO program that can be there? I think what's sometimes forgotten is that academic advisors, all of us will have an academic advisor. Sometimes it's, you have a lot of experience with your academic advisor, sometimes you don't, but they can be a really key partner in that conversation. And we tell students and we tell academic advisors that it would be great if they can also meet with a student and talk about, okay, what is your disability? They can help in regards to, if we don't know anything about the instructor, as Karen was mentioning, that knowledge of instructors, maybe that student, that academic advisor can say, you've shared that you have a writing disability. Maybe you should consider taking this section with an instructor who doesn't rely heavily on papers, but maybe does more exams. Or, you mentioned that you have a math-related disability. Maybe this is not the semester to take some really intensive courses and try to complete your math requirement. And so sometimes that academic advisor, if the student is letting them know, can help in that balancing. Faculty are also great. Usually they're going to have faculty office hours. I've heard that not many students, especially first generation students, don't know what office hours mean. And usually that means that the faculty member is going to be there to answer questions. And so that's a great time for students to reach out. We get a question of, can I have as an accommodation that my faculty member needs to answer my questions? And I say, that's not an accommodation. They should be doing that anyway. And so definitely making sure that students are feeling comfortable about utilizing those resources and know about these are some different ways. Some institutions have supplemental instruction. That's an individual who is actually sitting in the class and then actually will provide a tutoring session with the group. And so ask about, are those additional resources available? Check out the health and well-being. Is there a counseling center? Is there a student health center? Is there a wellness resource center? Know that the Dean of Students is sometimes available there as well. If a student has a mental health crisis and maybe needs to talk about a leave of absence or has been hospitalized and needs some support in talking with their instructors. So these are different resources. Know that not all counseling centers are going to be able to provide long-term care, but they might be an opportunity to connect with what are the other resources that are available in that area. And then, of course, that identity development, this is kind of one of my loves. I love talking about identity and culture and disability. And so talk about, are there student organizations? Are they connected with the Disability Resources Office? Are they separate? Are there peer mentoring? Are there other groups that are available? Is there a Disability Culture Center, a place where students can go to connect with others? So these are great ways to kind of provide that sense of belonging and that support, and also are a great way for peers to talk with peers about, how do you request, accommodations? What are some of those self-advocacy skills that really are helpful for you? What have you found to be beneficial? Because every year I'm getting older and the college students are staying the same age. And I'm realizing that their peers are sometimes the ones who have the greatest ideas that maybe I'm not able to provide. And so again, these are why we often say we're not going to be able to cover everything, but there may be other places on the campus that can provide those resources. I have another slide, but did either of you want to talk about any resources on your campus or anything else?
I think one resource I would mention is residential life. I know that a lot of times some students need some kind of support in the living space that's external of academics, and I know that most campuses have accommodations and services through residential life, but it may or may not be part of the same contact point as academic accommodations. So if you have a student that needs an individual room because of distractibility or anxiety, which we have a lot of those, there's a process, and find out that process through student life too, because or res life, because in our campus, res life is part of student life. But it isn't just academic accommodations and academic access. We want students to feel comfortable in the community that they're embarking on. And so living spaces is equally as important as academic space sometimes.
I would say along those lines is really the Disability Resource Office is responsible for providing access to anything that has anything to do with the institution, right? So if they want to attend the athletic experiences and they need to be able to access those facilities, the buildings, residential life, any of the other programming events that are happening. Maybe you have deaf or hard of hearing students, they need an interpreter to go to some sort of event on your campus, those kinds of things. So if it's tied to the institution, we're responsible for providing access to that. And to Karen's point, it's very different as to maybe what that looks like at any institution, having your student ask those pieces. At our college, at Columbia College, no matter what you want, it comes through us. At Westminster, not so much. There's, the residential life is handling those pieces, their office handling more of the academic side. So you want to just kind of find out, who are my contact points, what are the processes based on the school that you've chosen.
Excellent, thank you. And the other key piece is this can get really overwhelming for students. And so one of the greatest, kind of self-advocacy tools that they can learn is how to ask for help. And realizing that asking for help does not mean that they are less than another person. That actually is, a really successful skill and a good skill for anybody who is moving on and living in this world. So, and that also means reaching out to the Disability Center to help in digesting. We get questions all the time. Yeah, how do I request accommodations for an athletic event? Do you handle housing accommodations? I'm dealing with this situation, and we might say, not us, but here is how we can get you connected. Here's where you need to go. And so again, really understanding that, yes, we refer a lot, but that help, that seeking help is going to be a really important skill for students. So there are also a lot of external resources, some that can help students right now, and some that might help students when they get to college and all places in between. Now I'm looking across the room and I am recognizing some people who are probably going to be very upset at me and be like, Ashley, why is my organization not on this list? My apologies in advance. And in fact, I'm going to give you a chance to say, hey, Ashley, you should have listed us as well. But this is just a quick Google search. This was just a quick kind of where are some of those resources that we know students are connecting with, either that have helped them in getting to college or while they are at college. And so realize that it's not always going to maybe be all at that college. There might be other places a student can connect. And so the first thing I have up here is vocational rehabilitation services. We also have rehab services for the blind. Do I have any VR rehab services people here? Woo. Yes, representing. Excellent. And so definitely a great resource. We call, Voc Rehab and rehab services for the blind when we know that there's a student who is connected with them. Because sometimes some of those things that we aren't able to provide, maybe that's something that Voc Rehab can help with. Or sometimes Voc Rehab is saying, hey, you've been talking about this accommodation, and I think we need to get you connected back to the Disability Center. So great resource, another great advocacy for students. Up here, I also have organizations and advocacy groups. So just 3. There is so many more. I know that there are more in regards to college students with diabetes. I think there's probably college students with physical disabilities. Up here I have the College Autism Network, the Starkloff Institute in St. Louis. Anybody here from Starkloff Institute? They've got a couple of programs, Access U, Dream Big. I am not receiving any monetary funds from the Starkloff Institute, by the way, but they've got some great things for students. National Center for College Students with Disabilities, if you look them up, they have a lot of great resources for college students, again, helping and getting students connected, thinking about what maybe they need on a broader scale, and realizing that they are not the only student with a disability going to college. And the other thing I have up here is the Office of Civil Rights. Yes, the Office of Civil Rights. This is a place where students can go if they don't feel that they're getting their accommodations. And so we all make sure that students, when they, if we deny an accommodation, if they have an issue with our office, it is their right to file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. That might be the Office of Civil Rights on their campus, might be the Federal Office of Civil Rights. But the other reason why I have the Office of Civil Rights on here is that they've got great resources on transition as well. And in fact, I'm going to have at the very last slide, I have some links that actually suggest some resources for parents, resources for students that are getting prepared for that transition. And so definitely they can also help in understanding what students need to be doing and how to understand those differences as well. So with that, like I said, I'm going to first see, is there anybody out here who is saying, Ashley, we should have been listed as an external resource? Courtney.
Yes. I'm Courtney from the Thompson Center for Autism through the University of Missouri. And Think College is a great website. It lists all the post-secondary programs throughout the United States that offer certified transition programs so that third tier that they were talking about that offers the most supports, and you can look them up. And Missouri specifically has several. So from Think College, we have a group called MIPSA. It's the Midwest Inclusive Post-Secondary Alliance. They had a session here today, and that's going to be all the universities in Missouri that offer post-secondary disability-specific programs. And then at MU, we have a program called Strive. It's for students with autism or young adults who are maybe considering college or not sure if college is the right path. 18 to 30, we help them decide if you want to go to college, what that looks like. If you're in college, we help provide support. And then also really looking at those long-term goals of employment.
Thank you, Courtney. Anybody else that had an idea? It doesn't have to be your organization. Oh, behind me.
Centers for Independent Living. There's 22 in the state of Missouri that cover 114 counties. I work for one, Midland Empire Resources for Independent Living, near St. Joseph, Missouri. So we cover 9 counties up in the northwest corner. So we provide information referral, advocacy, peer support, and transition services, and independent living skills training. So 5 core services, as well as other home community-based services if individuals need that one-on-one support or an aid if they do qualify. So just keep those in mind too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Anybody else? All right. The other thing I grew up in Iowa, but I know Missouri also has a youth leadership forum. It's through the Governor's Commission, and so great resource. I did the Iowa one. I owe a lot to my experience with that and learning self-advocacy and learning how to ask for help. That was like my big thing that I learned my first year. And so look up Youth Leadership Forum. That might be another thing for students that are in high school that want to get away and kind of start building some of those skills as well. I know there are more resources. Google it, but let us know. We can keep building this resource list. Any other resources that either of you wanted to share?
There's a lot of resources. Every day I find a new one. As students, I encounter students who bring those resources with them. Our newest one is technology. As a school who's gone to one-to-one devices, I've had to learn a great deal about accessibility and technology so that technology resources, there's a lot of resources out there that we're continually educating ourselves on as we encounter new situations. It's not a stagnant world we live in.
I'm Maxine, and I'm working with my grandchildren here and then others in the community in Kansas City, and I'm just trying to find ways to develop together the right type of resources that I can connect with in order to better help them. So when you talked about the technology, we just walked out of a session talking about how they're trying to introduce it to the school system. So what I'm really struggling with here, at home and at school, this technology and how they've got us in such a pickle with the do's and the don'ts and the, breaking the law type situations. It's really a critical situation here. We're trying to get the education during the COVID-19 and everybody was online and their grandma. So, I really would like to be made more knowledgeable about who to trust, who not to trust, that has been approved by the district, so that the children, when they go into the system, because right now they've got some kind of restriction, where they cannot get in to some of these systems. But when they go home, it's a wide open field, unless someone is sitting there watching them. So what makes what you're doing in the school system, effective for our youth that are coming in to the system? Because you were saying you were being introduced, you were being trained on some of the technologies. Well, and then just kind of advise, what would be best, we're potential individuals seeking, college resources and the do's, what to do, how to approach the technology situation.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this question. Technology is very individual at the college level. The only limiting factor is going to be factors that are dictated by the security of the systems administrator, whatever program or devices they want to use, it has to pass the administrator's checklist, which is basically hacking protocols. We use an iPad. We're an iPad school. All our students are issued that, and so we work with students on identifying pieces of technology that are iPad compatible. It depends on the device. The discrepancy between home and school is a K through 12 problem. It is, and I understand that because there are restrictions in the high schools and junior highs on what technology can access, and I totally understand why that's there. But when a student hits an adult level at 18, that access is open to them to use whatever tool gives them the benefit. So we have been training on built-in accessibility features, what apps can students use, what devices can students use that they need, and learning how to use those. We don't provide those devices except for the iPad, but if a student brings a device and they need help, I'm going to go find out how it works, and I have to learn about new devices. Scribe pens were all the fad a decade ago. I had to learn all about those, and now they're kind of almost obsolete with the technology on tablets and those kind of things. They're not completely worthless, but there's so much other out there that, I learned that, but the world moves on. So the discrepancy for you is what? Oh, cool. Because I'm working on an open technology.
So, Missouri Assistive Technology, Blue Springs, they have a wide variety of services, because you are right, once they graduate high school, the devices or software that they use belongs to the school. They do have a variety of programs through Missouri Assistive Technology to get devices. Some centers for independent living provide demonstrations on certain devices before they purchase an iPad or software, that kind of thing. David Baker has a booth out there that has a list of all their services and programs that they offer. So that is a good resource. So like if a student uses an iPad and they go to a college that does not provide iPads and they need that device and an app, they could easily, through a loan, or be able to purchase that themselves through Missouri Assistive Technology or any other accommodations devices that they may need for certain items. Your local independent living center in Kansas City could help provide demonstrations for those.
And the whole person is your Center for Independent Living, and they do provide, the whole person is the Center for Independent Living in Kansas City, and they do provide demonstrations, so.
Columbia, too.
I was say, we've moved into the Q&A session. It was a great transition. Another great thing for you to, as students are thinking about the technology that they've used, is to ask about that. Ooh, okay, that's freaky. Hello. All right. Ooh, I wasn't expecting that. But that might be another thing for students to think about, is like, well, this is the system technology that I've used. Some institutions will provide that. So at Mizzou, all students, faculty, and staff have access to Kurzweil 3000, as well as Snap and Read. There are some other tools that we will refer students to our Adaptive Computing Technology Center that they can receive. So again, one of those other tools to ask and say, hey, is this something you provide? Is this something I'm going to need to provide? All right. Other questions? We wanted to leave time, so we knew we weren't going to cover everything. We've got about 15 minutes. Who has another question?
Hold on, hold on. Nope, they insist.
Oh, boy. Okay, as a VR counselor, these 3 different approaches you guys have talked about in the colleges. So I deal with a lot of students, preparing them to have accommodations arranged when they enter colleges so they don't, fall through the cracks. And then some I'm very, very familiar with the process. Some will accept a letter from me. Some will accept IEP 504. Some want medical documentation from a doctor. Long story short, other than just getting on the college page and basically researching all of the requirements to receive accommodations, colleges aren't going to just throw this label somewhere. Okay, so then it's just a matter of...
Okay, so I guess she's asking about how we label ourselves when students visit. So it's part of the visit that we should encourage students to connect with the disabilities office as they visit colleges. Those are Karen's labels. Those aren't labels that we give to colleges, but trying to help you understand the spectrum of support. So each institution that a student is interested in, yeah, it comes down to web searches or one-on-one dialogue with the Disability Resource Office when they do a college visit. Any student that needs an accommodation should not leave a college visit without visiting that. I spend as much time providing accommodations as I do meeting prospective students to make sure that we are a good fit. We don't want kids to get in over their head into the wrong environment. We really want, and I know all of us do, we want students to be successful, and candid conversations have to occur at times about whether that we can provide those resources or those accommodations before they enter the door. We don't want to set them up to fail. So web search is, I know it's on our office.
I think it would really make a big impact. I think it would be just, maybe it's asking too much, but I would like to see all these different groups that are out here representing students that need special accommodations to be under one roof, where they could, each one reach one that needs that type of service. I would like to see a miracle like that come into existence.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges you're going to have is every college is going to be different. And even here, we've talked about the different philosophies that we have on documentation, and the different sizes of our institutions are going to vary as well. So it is challenging, I will say for sure. And I think that's one of the challenges for us is how can we help students navigate, a very decentralized campus like Mizzou, where maybe things are a little bit more connected in other areas. So definitely, I think again, that's where I encourage students to make that list of what do I need. And then that Disability Resources Office can really help in making those connections. And is that all under one roof, or is that maybe in a couple of different areas on campus?
So I am a student. I was a student with an IEP that went to college and had accommodations. And you mentioned TRIO. I was a TRIO member, or Student Support Services. Just want to let you know there are 2 types of TRIO. One is tutoring based, and some colleges do have that. The other one is peer mentoring, and some colleges have that too. I attended 2 colleges. One had tutoring and one had mentoring base. So that is just a little difference with the TRIO program that may be a benefit for the students depending on if the college of their choosing has the TRIO program.
Thank you. Okay, all in the way in the back. I got it. I need my steps today.
So I just had a quick question about I have a couple of youth that I work with who are exploring colleges. Is there any like specific questions? I mean, I know there's probably 1,000 of them, but like any specific questions that you would recommend that they ask when they go to like the accessibility center, like any specific things that they need to know kind of right off the bat as far as like accommodations or just really anything along those lines?
I promise I'm not going to be the only one to talk, so I'm going to run this up front. All right, I'm going to try not to run over anybody's toes. Melissa, Karen, who wants to talk first?
I would say the biggest pieces is what do you offer? What do you have beyond accommodations? And what is the process of the requirements needed to access any or all of that? So as we've kind of mentioned, figuring out, is this institution the right fit for me? Do I need ADA compliance, just the basics? Am I looking for something more of a center approach? Am I looking for, more of a comprehensive type program? And then what is the requirements to get those accommodations? Because we ask for documentation, MU does sometimes and does not others, and then their program being more comprehensive may ask for a greater level of documentation as well. I think some of the key things also are, what's the turnaround time? How soon should I be exploring these things? I'm going to speak on behalf of Columbia College, but I'm guessing the same is true for you. We all meet with prospective students. We do not identify and approve accommodations till you're admitted. So you want to kind of know some of those layouts so that you can be picking an institution that kind of fits what your needs are and really knowing their process. And if it is somebody, to Karen's point earlier, I'm going to be a residential student on campus and there's some additional pieces I need to explore with that. Who are my contact points? Are you guys all, kind of a one-stop shop, or are there other points of contact with the institution I need to become familiar with? Anything you guys would add?
I would also suggest students identify their current accommodations and using that list, ask how is this different at the college level, just so they can begin to see how things are different, so there's no surprises and the students' expectations are on target. I think that's an eye-opening discussion with students sometimes when they start listing everything, and you have to tell them, well, that's not quite available like that in college, so let's talk about how can you be successful without that accommodation? How can you address it?
I was gonna say, I think you both got everything. I really liked the idea of like the differences between this accommodation and how that might apply, because I know that is something we'll have a lot of students ask, where is the testing center? What is the process, for notifying my instructors of accommodations? One of the other things is a good question, students asking, how often will I see my disability, counselor? Is it somebody that I need to meet with every month, every semester? Is it a one and done? How might I, reach out if I have questions or concerns? Because that can also kind of give a sense as to kind of that level of support that they might receive at that institution. Okay.
I just had one burning question. Say if you're doing like a sports along with the academics, how does that work with if, say, for example, if I got a student that wants to be in football, what level, what are the requirements in order to maintain being on a football team, along with the academics, the balance?
Well, I can actually answer this as the faculty athletic representative for my institution of an NCAA Division III. The NCAA requires that student athletes be enrolled and engaged in 12 credit hours per semester, and anything less than that would need to be documented through some pretty extensive documentation that would have to be approved by the NCAA itself. Now, I cannot answer NAIA, but I know it's true for all NCAA. What about, is it 12? So they have to be a full-time student. They can only go less than full-time status with extensive documentation that has to be approved by the National Governing Board. Other than that, there's no other restriction. Any other questions? Any other questions?
I just want to make sure I heard that right. So it's possible that somebody at MU with a disability could get accommodations just based on pure self-report?
Uh-oh.
Maybe. So when we meet with students, we tell them, or when they ask about our process, we say, fill out the online application. If you have documentation, if you have that psychoeducational evaluation, that IEP, that 504, that letter from your physician, awesome, upload it. If you don't have it, that's okay. Because we're still going to meet with you, and we're going to talk with you about what your accommodation needs are. And it is possible that without any documentation, we might say, you know what, you articulated your accommodation needs so well. What you are requesting, we're making that professional judgment. It makes logical sense. We have that nexus. We don't need any further documentation. A lot of times that's students who are just needing extended time on exams. If we have a student who's a wheelchair user, I'm not going to ask them for documentation to verify that they have a spinal cord injury and that they need a table. No. And even students with learning disabilities and ADHD, we have, if they tell us that I have been working with a medical provider since I was 9 years old, this is my IEP, this is my information, these are the accommodations. All I'm requesting is extended time in a structure-induced environment. If we have enough information, we will say, okay, that's fine. But we always reserve the right, and we still have the right, and we have requested documentation. And so we always tell students, we're going to meet with you, we're going to get your self-report, we're going to use that information to decide what further documentation we need, if any. Because we know that documentation can be a barrier for students. And we oftentimes, even when we were getting documentation, we were relying on what the student was telling us. And so we will request documentation. There are certain things that we will always request documentation on. Emotional support animals. What is the other thing? Honestly, course substitutions. I knew there was a second. So pretty extensive accommodations. That's when we, the more involved the accommodation is going to be. So course substitutions, emotional support animals, those are guaranteed. We will tell students we are going to need documentation before we kind of really move further. Everything else, we're going to look at what that student's report is. But the more and more complex, the more and more involved the accommodation, flex attendance, flex deadlines, modifications to clinical schedules, anything that we're really looking at a substantial modification, those are situations where we're going to we are going to need a little bit more documentation. So if you go to our website, you will not see documentation guidelines. I know when we did this, everybody was like, but we want information. And we're like, we want to talk with you. But definitely, that's why I say, and I love Karen's example of creating that file, because we always tell students to be prepared. We do not need you to bring binders of documentation in, but we want you to have it available if we're saying, you know what, we're not quite getting the connection here, or based on what you're requesting, we are going to need something further. But then we can say, this is exactly what we're needing. We're needing a letter from your physician that actually talks more about your functional limitations. We're actually going to need that diagnosis. We're going to need maybe recommendations. We can be really targeted to that student in their specific need, so that we were trying not to request overly burdensome documentation in order for them to receive accommodations. I probably talked about more than what you really wanted, but grand scheme, maybe. All right, so while everybody is thinking maybe of that last question, still not working. Those of you who have the slide deck, there is one final slide that has some connections and links that are available. I have my cheat sheet here so I can look that up. One is a link to the that National Center for College Students with Disabilities, that area that I said, oh, there, thank you so much. That has a lot of information and resources. There is also 2 links from the Office of Civil Rights, Students with Disabilities Preparing for Post-Secondary Ed, and a Dear Parent letter. So obviously the Dear Parent letter is written for parents. The other one is written more for students. Great resources talking about the differences between high school and college, what to expect. A lot of what we talked about here today, but from a different agency that's telling you that. Why is there an open letter to parents from Jane Jarrow? Who is this Jane Jarrow? Jane is actually a prominent figure in our world. She is a consultant. She often talks a lot and presents at our professional organizations. And several years ago, she was a parent of a student with a disability who was going into college. And she was like, I get what parents are feeling right now. And so she wrote an open letter to those parents. And so this is a great resource. It's a person who understands our world, trying to communicate that to parents. And so it's a great resource we also provide to students and parents as they're getting ready for that transition, because parents are transitioning at the same time that students are as well. So anyway, with that, we are at time. I and my other colleagues will be up here as we're wrapping things up if you have other questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today and your attentiveness and your engagement, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.